Scotland was gripped by a series of unsolved violent crimes against sex workers from 1991 to 2005. In April 2005, Emma Caldwell, a 27-year-old sex worker battling substance addiction, prepared for her night on Glasgow streets. 5 weeks after she was last seen, her body was discovered in isolated woodlands. Despite early suspicions and a mountain of evidence centering on a local man known for his violent behavior towards women, the case remained unsolved for nearly 2 decades. It wasn't until 2022, following sustained media pressure, that a conviction was finally achieved, bringing a closure to a case that had remained open for 17 years. This is the story of Emma Caldwell. Hello and welcome to my channel. Please be aware that we discuss sensitive and disturbing topics in this video. Now, let's lift the thin veil. Emma Caldwell was born on January 31st, 1978 to her parents, Margaret and William Caldwell, in a village called Cardross, 30 kilometers northwest of Glasgow. As a child, Emma was a fan of drama class and loved horses. She would become a horse riding instructor in her 20s. She was known to befriend orphan children from the local orphanage in her village. Emma had a very happy childhood in a loving family and was especially close to her older sister, Karen. But sometime in the 90s, Karen was diagnosed with cancer, which unfortunately took her life in 1998 when Emma was around 20 years old. This sent Emma into a deep depression, looking for ways to cope with the death and falling into the trap of drugs such as heroin, which were introduced to her by her boyfriend at the time. Over months, Emma's behavior changed and she lost lots of weight. One night, she eventually confessed to her parents about her addiction. Because her parents were unaware of how addiction worked, they decided to take her to the hospital. But upon arriving there, they were told there was not much support doctors could offer. In 2002, Emma's boyfriend convinced her to move into the Govan area of Glasgow. Govan is a district of Glasgow that lies on the south bank of the River Clyde, historically renowned for its shipbuilding industry, which once made it a vital hub of industrial Britain. The area has faced significant challenges, including deprivation and poverty. However, Govan is also home to landmarks like the Govan Old Parish Church, which houses ancient carved stones, and a proud working-class community known for its resilience. Although much of the area has since transformed, in the early 2000s, it was still grappling with relatively high crime rates. The dates are unclear, but during her stay in Glasgow, at some point, she split up with her boyfriend and moved to a women's hostel where her stay was quite unpleasant. Reportedly, she had problems with the other residents and staff. Even with the move, her parents both made every effort to see Emma every week, with William visiting her every Wednesday and Margaret every Sunday. They'd buy her food, help her with her chores, and even fill her mobile phone with enough credit so she could stay in touch. Emma's parents were aware of her heroin addiction, but their inexperience with drugs left them unaware of its financial toll. Over the course of 3 years from 2002, Emma had secretly turned to sex work to support herself and fund her habit. This aspect of her life remained hidden from her family. Due to sex work being an unregulated industry in Scotland, it can be an extremely dangerous job for women, especially during the time of Emma's murder. In Glasgow, 6 other sex workers, all women, were murdered between 1991 and 2005. Sensationalized media articles suggested that there could be a potential serial killer on the loose, but this was later discovered not to be the case. Until this day, only 2 of these 6 cases have ever been solved, with accusations from the public that the police have not done enough to investigate. I'll be listing the names of the women at the end of this video. Unfortunately, as reported by fellow sex workers who had been around Emma, she was often a target of these dangers, with harassment, threats, and abuse from clients or other strangers as well. At some point, it seemed that Emma had enough. She had built the strength to seek rehabilitation for her drug addiction. something that made her parents proud. Emma had even suggested she would move back in with her parents, which made them extremely happy. But sadly, this would never happen. Upon their last meeting on April 3rd, 2005, Margaret noted that Emma was extremely nervous and agitated at something, and she did not want to sit and chat with her in the car after their time together. She was intent on going back to the hostel, this time asking to be parked right opposite the front door. Emma told her mother that she'd call her in a couple of days, and they said their goodbyes, not knowing this would be the last time they'd meet. On April 5th, 2005, William needed to reschedule his weekly get-together with Emma, as they had made plans for his mother's birthday. However, when attempts were made to get in touch with her by phone, there was no response. Over the course of a couple of days, Emma's parents grew increasingly concerned and decided they'd report her disappearance to the police. At the police station, they were informed that Emma was known to them as one of the working girls. This was a shock to them, but the important thing at that point was to find Emma and ensure she's safe and sound. She was last seen leaving her hostel at around 10:50 p.m. on April 4th, 2005. Further CCTV footage showed her walking to the city centre on a street that ends by the River Clyde, her last known whereabouts. The police and the Caldwells searched for weeks on the streets of Glasgow and surrounding areas. Her parents would pitch up in areas she was known to work, showing people her photograph and asking if they'd seen her for hours into the night, but to no avail. One night, they sat in the car on a busy street for hours, staring at a picture of her projected onto a large building in the hope of seeing her walking around. On May 8th, 2005, 5 weeks later, Margaret received the call that Emma had been found, but not alive. Her undressed body was found face down in a ditch in Limefield Woods, South Lanarkshire, by a dog walker. Tied around her neck was a garrote, which was later discovered to be a cable to wire neon signs, and next to her were a set of footprints. Forensics showed that someone had squeezed her neck, cutting off her air. The injuries looked like they came from someone using their hands to choke Emma, but the possibility that a rope or cord was used as well couldn't be ruled out. That would explain the cable around her neck. There were traces of DNA on Emma's private areas, but not significant enough to be tested for. Used condoms were found near the area, but they were not relevant to the crime scene. As a side note, this was a known tactic used by sex workers, ensuring to leave DNA of themselves and their customers in case anything were to happen to them. Because Emma's body wasn't found right away, it was harder for investigators to collect DNA evidence. This delay made it more challenging to figure out exactly what happened. To make matters worse, they never found Emma's phone, clothes, or other personal items. These missing pieces of evidence added further challenges. Who killed Emma Caldwell? Before reorganizing as a national force in 2013, Police Scotland had 8 separate forces in the country. The police force tasked with investigating Emma's case was known as Strathclyde Police. I'll be referring to them as Police Scotland or Scottish Police for the rest of this video. At the time, murders were internally categorized by the Scottish Police on a scale of importance from Category A to C, highest to lowest. According to retired Detective Sergeant John Sallins in a BBC interview, internally, murders against sex workers were classified as the lowest priority, Category C, and hence, lessening their chances to be allocated the resources to be solved. Other examples of a Category C murder would be 2 intoxicated individuals getting into an altercation and one killing the other. Because so many sex workers had been killed in this time period, and the police were under pressure from the media and the public to solve them, Emma's case was given a Category A priority. This would turn into one of Scotland's largest-scale murder investigations with hundreds of people interviewed, but I'll focus on 2 key aspects: the accounts of the sex workers that knew Emma and the questionable direction the police led the investigation to, even when they had strong suspicions about one man. In the wake of Emma Caldwell's murder in 2005, police interviewed sex workers in Glasgow's city centre, particularly in an area known as The Drag, where they used to sell their services. These women consistently mentioned a particular man who frequented their areas, describing him as short but strong, with a notably foul odor. They knew him by various names: Peter, Craig, John, or Blue Van Man. When shown photographs of potential suspects, several women identified the same individual, Iain Packer. Packer was a mid-30-year-old something neon sign technician and had a troubling history with sex workers. Multiple women reported that he was a regular client of Emma's, with a pattern of forcing himself on her and others. They described his behavior as obsessive, often driving around the city in his company van searching for Emma. If he saw her with other clients, he tried to scare them off. Just a week before her murder, Packer had reportedly sexually assaulted Emma. As suspicions grew, police delved deeper into Packer's background. They discovered he had a preference for rough, outdoor sexual encounters and a volatile temper. He was known to choke and hurt women during sex, refusing to stop even when asked. His obsession with paying for sex had led to substantial debt and 2 failed marriages. Notably, in June 2005, just weeks after Emma's body was discovered, multiple workers informed the police that Packer was listed multiple times in something called a Beware Book, a log of dangerous individuals known to commit violent and abusive acts against sex workers. The Beware Book was maintained by a now defunct sex worker support group called Base 75 and was handed over to the police early in the investigation sometime in 2005. This book has mysteriously vanished since then. The first police interview with Packer occurred on June the 21st, 2005, when he was caught attempting to solicit a sex worker. Initially, he denied knowing Emma, but his story changed over subsequent interviews, where he'd describe her appearance very accurately. By his 4th interview, sometime in late 2006, he admitted he'd been with Emma up to 10 times. He also admitted to forcing himself upon Emma and other sex workers, but he wouldn't stop there. Packer also admitted taking Emma to Limefield Woods. Nearly 2 years after the murder, on March the 13th, 2007, during his 6th interview, Packer made a significant offer to show detectives the area in the woods where he had taken Emma and the other women. Packer guided the police to Limefield Woods, to an area just 65 meters from where Emma's body was found. The isolated nature of the site made it highly unlikely for anyone not involved in the case to stumble upon it accidentally. At the woods, Packer claimed he had taken Emma there 6 times, though this statement, like many of his others, would later be retracted and modified. 4 other sex workers Packer had been with also independently led the police to this same location over the course of the investigation. Upon returning from Limefield Woods, the detectives were convinced Packer was on the verge of confessing. However, when they asked their superiors if they could arrest him, they were instructed to release Packer and cease further questioning, as there was allegedly a more plausible group of suspects. This decision was made despite the mounting evidence, including the neon sign cable found around Emma's neck, which aligned with Packer's profession, but was disregarded by the superiors at Police Scotland. Here is where the investigation takes a really weird turn. 5 months later, in August 2007, it was revealed to officers lower in the chain of command that the higher-ups in Police Scotland had shifted their focus to a Turkish cafe on Bridge Street in Glasgow. They believed they had identified 4 Turkish men as Emma's killers. The operation, called Operation Guard, was huge and expensive, costing £4 million. It involved undercover officers from foreign police forces, electronic surveillance of the cafe, and countless hours of recording and translating conversations. The police thought these recordings would prove the men's guilt. But why did they suspect these men? Well, it started with Emma's phone records. The last call to her phone on the night she disappeared came from a Turkish man near the cafe. This cafe, some women told the police, was a place where people drank and gambled. Some even claimed they had been assaulted there. This cafe was an unsafe place where horrible things were happening. There are a number of reasons why it should have been investigated, but the question was it relevant to the murder of Emma? The case seemed to get stronger when they found a tiny spot of Emma's blood on a quilt in the cafe. Then, Transcripts of secret recordings seem to show the cafe owner talking about the murder. They appear to discuss killing Emma, wrapping her body in a carpet and using a cable. They also appear to discuss discarding Emma's belongings in a wooded area close to a casino where, in fact, a black jumper was found. The 4 Turkish men were remanded, as the police believed they had enough evidence to prosecute them. But things weren't as they seemed. When the men were arrested and their lawyers had the tapes translated independently from the police's translations, they found no talk of murder, bodies, rugs, or cables. An expert who listened to 400 hours of tapes said there was no proof the men were involved in the murder at all. The police had jumped to conclusions because they had invested a lot of time and money into surveilling this cafe, and rather than stopping the costly operation, they decided to double down on it. It turned out that some of the seemingly out-of-context quotes were just the men talking about being questioned at the police station and the fact that Emma was murdered. The blood on the quilt and any of Emma's DNA in the cafe was because she had been there several times in the past to inject drugs and sell her services, but there was nothing to suggest it had anything to do with her murder. The belongings found near the casino had no relevancy to the case or Emma. The police officer who first translated the tapes, Aksoy Ozer, later said he was put under immense pressure and told to hide some things he'd heard. It's unclear as to what exactly he was told to hide, but he later also claimed his Turkish wasn't very good. After 80 days in jail, the Turkish men were freed. One of them, the cafe owner, was later convicted of other crimes, but not Emma's murder. One of the men even sued Police Scotland for £100,000 and chose to settle out of court for an undisclosed sum. This intense focus on the Turkish men led the police to set aside their earlier suspect, Iain Packer. Even though they had strong suspicions about Packer, they spent months trying to link Packer to the Turkish men and the Turkish men to Emma's crime scene. In fact, in Packer's 5th interview in October 2006, they even asked him if he knew anything about the Turkish cafe, and he outright denied knowing anything about a Turkish cafe or having any Turkish friends. Even after the case against the Turkish men fell apart, the most bizarre thing after all of this is that the police just stopped searching for Emma's killer, and it's not clear why Packer was not investigated further. But the case would go cold for almost 10 years, until retired detective Jerry Gallagher took his story to the press, raising concerns about the failed murder investigation. Gallagher had been conducting his own investigation since 2013 and claimed that it was common knowledge amongst the lower rungs of the police that Packer needed to be investigated further, but their only hurdle was the police leadership holding them back. In an article published in a Scottish tabloid called Sunday Mail in April 2015, it was pointed out anonymously by Gallagher and other officers about the police's shortcomings and inaction in pursuing the case. Most of it was criticism that they had spent so much time and money investigating the 4 Turkish men and not Packer. What's bizarre is that after this article was published, Police Scotland opened an investigation into finding the identities of the anonymous sources of the article rather than finding the killer of Emma. I mentioned Gallagher's name because he's gone public with this information, and the other sources choose to remain out of the public eye. Whilst the Sunday Mail article had gotten people talking about Emma's murder once again, the wheels were really set in motion to solve Emma's case after a 2019 BBC Disclosure documentary where he was interviewed on 2 separate occasions. This interview was something Packer was on board with. In fact, it was his idea because he wanted to clear his name. During the first interview, he denied killing Emma and claimed he had never been violent towards any women, and this led the journalist, Samantha Poling, to an investigation which found otherwise. In the second interview, Poling confronted Packer with the evidence, which was later handed over to the police. I really can't do this documentary justice by explaining it further, so I do recommend you watch it. Poling did a fantastic job investigating Packer, which nudged the police to finally start acting on the information they already had for 14 years. The interview really does show Packer's arrogance and how much he thought he was in control of the situation. Within a few days of the confrontation with Poling, Packer's partner at the time went to the police to complain that Packer had pushed her onto a bed, put his hands around her throat, choked her till she was injured, and endangered her life. Packer had multiple accusations for assault since being suspected of Emma's murder, but had not seen the inside of a jail cell. He was arrested and convicted for 2 years and walked free once again. But it would take until February 2022 to build the charges against Packer for the murder of Emma Caldwell, almost 17 years after her demise. During his trial, Packer admitted to forcing himself upon Emma but not killing her. 27 women that were victimized sexually or through other forms of assault by Packer had come forward and shared their violent encounters in front of the jury. Forensic evidence from Packer's van's footwell matched the soil composition from the site where Emma's body was found. While the exact timing of when this evidence was collected remains unclear, it played a crucial role in linking Packer to the crime scene. Ultimately, Packer was found guilty for the murder of Emma Caldwell and also had 32 other charges against 22 other women, some who were harmed after Emma's murder. He was sentenced to a minimum of 36 years, the second longest sentence ever in Scotland. After Packer was put away, Police Scotland apologised for mishandling the case back in 2005. They admitted that Emma, her family, and other victims were let down by the police at that time. The Caldwell family has not accepted their apology, and who can blame them? It is reported that several women that Packer had sexually assaulted after murdering Emma were themselves arrested and charged for prostitution upon trying to report him. If not, their reports were ignored completely. There will be a public inquiry which will look into the actions of Police Scotland. The date of the public inquiry is yet to be announced. On March 6, 2024, Packer announced he would appeal against his conviction, claiming the length of his sentence was too long, but his appeal was refused in August 2024. Packer still insists that the dozens of women who spoke against him are all lying. Iain Packer is a violent murderer, and that is all he will be remembered as. Despite the mountain of evidence they had to work with, Police Scotland waited far too long to give justice to the Caldwell family. Here are the other victims of unsolved violent crimes against women from the string of cases between 1991 and 2005. Their families deserve justice as well. Thank you for listening.